Good evening, everyone. My name is Thane Rosenbaum. I'm the creative director of the Forum on Life, Culture, and Society at Touro College. And welcome to the FOLCS Conversation series. Tonight's conversation is on American opportunity. Is America still actually the land of opportunity? It's hard to know. It's a timely question to ask. You know, we've had years now of an industrial decline, loss of jobs to China, dislocations in economic progress, especially regionally, rising education costs, political upheavals and partisan divides, a racial reckoning, of course, union strikes, which we'll talk about soon, even a pandemic. And so it is a timely question to discuss, and we have the perfect two people to speak about this. The first person is Fiona Hill. Many of you know her. There's Fiona. Hey, Fiona. Many of you met Fiona for reasons maybe she didn't want, but we all met her when she testified in Donald Trump's first impeachment trial. She came to literally global attention, and her poised demeanor and her honest, sort of integrity in the testimony, I think, captured the imagination of people who don't have a good opinion of people who work in government. And I think that she, in many ways, represented the very best of that. She has a long history in government. She's been on the National Intelligence Committee, the National Security Council. She's a longtime historian and foreign policy expert on Russia. She's worked in 3 presidential administrations in national security high positions, and that includes Democrat and Republican. She started off in George W. Bush's administration, and then Barack Obama, and then Donald Trump. She's presently at the Brookings Institute, and she's the author of this recent book, a wonderful book, There Is Nothing for You Here. A very beguiling, alluring title. I think it's actually the words of her father, who was a coal miner, former coal miner from northeastern United Kingdom. And this book it's many things. I would say it's a Valentine to the working class. I would say that. I would say that it's a personal memoir and a very compelling story that Fiona has. And it has serious policy prescriptions on how to improve the lot of the working class and to rescue cities that are towns, small manufacturing towns that have been lost to economic despair. So this is a great book. You should buy this book, and you can buy this book online. I'll tell you that in a moment, how to do that. And by the way, if you read J.D. Vance's book, Hillbilly Elegy, this is better. This is really offers a lot of things that are not in there. Fiona, I should tell you, you probably don't know this, but you probably don't know the story. My understanding is that Amy Adams will also be playing you in the movie version of your book. This is going to be Amy Adams' thing. She's going to play that woman. It comes from that part of the world. It's going to be her thing, and you get the next one.
Well, she's very versatile, so
yes, exactly right. No, she's not giving up. She did Vance's. She's doing you, and we also have Dan Osborn. Hey, Dan, say hi to everybody.
Hello.
There's Dan. Dan is a longtime employee for Kellogg's corporation out in Nebraska. Worked for them for 18 years now. He's also the union president for the Kellogg employees that are in that region. Many of you know Kellogg's employees, they're in strike nationally. They're on strike. 1,400 employees are on strike. Dan is one of the leaders of that strike, and he's going to talk about what, nowadays we don't think a lot about work stoppages, and he's going to tell us a little about the one that he handles and what he supervises truly in Nebraska. And so, Dan, welcome. Wonderful having you.
It's good to be here.
If you have a question for Dan or Fiona, you can leave it in the Q&A box. If you're watching us on Facebook Live, welcome. We always love having you with us. Don't forget to go to folks.org and sign up for our email list so you can get notice of all of our upcoming events. And here's a way to purchase this book. You go to the chat box, and the chat box has a link and you click on the link and you can go buy Fiona's book. And remember the Amy Adams movie that's coming out. You want to be way ahead of that. That's what I'm saying.
Can I interject for just a second?
Yes, Dan.
I just had my 18-year-old daughter move to Hollywood. She's an aspiring dancer, actor, and then maybe she can play the young Fiona Hill.
Yeah. I like how Dan thinks. He's the labor organizer, right? He's managing you now.
He signed.
So let's start with you, Fiona. The book has so many interesting ideas in it, original ideas, and it comes from someone who knows that world, although from the accent is clearly northeastern UK. You went to Harvard, got a PhD, you've been with us for many years, you are an American, you are one of us. So you know our world of the Rust Belt, and you know your world of the Rust Belt. Tell us why, when you talk about the consequences of declining opportunities, what that means, why is it so bad? Because you tell us that not only you tell us it's bad, you also tell us where it can lead, right? That we take for granted when there's a lack of social mobility, and we just assume, well, you could just move to another country like you did and your sister did, but there's more to it. There's more at stake, right?
There is then, and look, I mean, it's great being on here with Dan, especially, as we were saying before we started, I've got family out in Nebraska as well, in Hastings, not too far away from Omaha. And also an interesting point, my father-in-law, who grew up on a farm in South Dakota, just outside of Mitchell, the home of the Corn Palace, he got his first job off the back of a cereal box.
Oh,
not
wow.
Kellogg's, but in fact, General Mills. I talk about this in the book, because back in the day in the 1950s, opportunity worked like that, right?
Yeah.
You could, he got his education under what was then the GI Bill, and I'm going to use this to kind of move into the answer to your question here then. He was, first off the farm, to go off to college. He actually hitchhiked from just outside of Mitchell to, basically Wesleyan South Dakota University. He was, a long line of farmers who'd settled out there in the prairie, in the plains, like many people did in Nebraska and South Dakota and Iowa, etc., many extended members of his family. And he wanted to do something to help farmers, basically have more markets for their products. So he decided to become a food chemist. And he's a hard life on the farm. He's working the farm because his father had died, and he's in charge of the farm and looking after his family and trying to get an education at the same time. And when he finishes his degree, he doesn't know what to do. There's no opportunity out there. Nobody comes recruiting. It's kind of join the army because it's like 1950, thereabouts, and go off to Korea. During the Korean War, and he's kind of figuring out what does he do, and he's sitting at the table and he sees his cereal box there, and it's General Mills, and I think it's like Cheerios or something, kind of early on, the Cheerios were around then too, just like Kellogg's cornflakes and everything. And he sees the address and he decides to write a letter with his resume, and he writes, kind of to whom it may concern, to General Mills, and he gets the job. And the thing is, we used to take that for granted. Back in the period of the 1950s and onwards. The United States was the land of opportunity. The north of England, where I was growing up in the 1950s, it was kind of a golden age for coal miners like my father. Everything was really kind of flourishing. And then that opportunity starts to dry up. And in part it's because of deindustrialization, but it's also because of changes in society, aspirations, access to education, access and affordable, ways of kind of bettering yourself. Just even the chance thing of being able to write to somebody, on the back of a cereal box and get your resume looked at. All of those kinds of things that really made the United States one of the most mobile countries in the world have ground to a halt. You've only got a 7% chance of moving from the bottom 20% in the United States socioeconomic strata, where my father-in-law found himself, to the top 20% now. At the time, my father-in-law was writing, it was like 50%.
Do we know what that number would have been like? Did you say that number would have been?
It was probably around that. At least that's what we all thought, right? That was the expectations. When I came to the United States from the northeast of England in 1989, I mean, admittedly, I came to graduate school and I didn't write in, from the back of my cereal box to get there. I really thought that the United States, this was it. Everybody would always have that opportunity. And in that 30 plus years since I've been here, and I'm sure Dan would see that happening, because Dan, you're a bit younger than I am, the opportunities of people who've kind of in those generations after me have kind of dried up. I had an education that I benefited from without any educational debt. Back in the UK, my local education authority paid for me. I got grants and all kinds of fellowships when I came to the United States.
Fiona, one second, you
Yeah,
do
exactly.
point out in the book, but that itself required resources, meaning that wasn't so obvious. It required people that helped support you, lead you in the right direction, right? That you're saying that, that even for you, how you did this, it was a group effort.
Yeah, and it was like my local government. And you know what also played a really important role, because here's where Dan comes in, it was unions. Unions weren't always about strike action. They did obviously have an important role to play for better pay, for better working conditions. My father, my grandfather, my great-grandfather was a spokesman for the Durham Miners Association, which was one of the forerunners of the miners' union. But one of the things that they also did was when they paid their union dues, there was an educational element. And I got a grant from the Durham Miners Association when I was first starting to study Russian. It was a very small grant, but it enabled me to go on an educational course.
And it also gives this sense of that they understood what was important.
Yeah, they wanted to have not just, kind of better working conditions, better pay. They wanted a better life for their kids.
Yeah, Fiona Hill should have
actually paid for us to, go off and do things.
So Dan, I think this is a good time to ask you, I'm going to ask you in a moment about tell us what life is like on the picket line. But before you do that, I want to, given what Fiona just said, I read somewhere that you said that one of the reasons you're striking with your union is, and I think I get this right, you want there to be, I love this quote, the continuation of the American dream, right? That you said you want to save the middle class and the continuation of the American dream. What I think Fiona is talking about now and what her book is about is the evaporation of that middle class, that they just disappeared. Towns have disappeared, people have disappeared, livelihoods disappeared, and people didn't know what to do next. And one of the things that she talks about, which we'll get to, is that they at that point would much more be vulnerable to gravitating toward populist ideas, right? So this is one way to understand 4 years of Donald Trump, right? That his appeal was very much to people who felt a sense of resentment that they're not participating in the American economy. So tell us two things. First, just tell us about your understanding when you said continuation of the American dream. You have an American flag behind you. That's a good start. Yeah. You're obviously a patriot and you want to do the right thing in the strike. And then maybe you can tell us a little about life on the picket line nowadays.
Yeah, so, to touch on what Fiona said about education and grants and things like that. I myself have a history. I joined the United States Navy right out of high school. I finished that and I signed up under the Navy College Fund. My whole purpose was to get into college and get an education. And I got out of the Navy. Then I joined. Wasn't sure what I wanted to do. The Navy College Fund still wasn't enough for me to justify going to a university. So I joined the National Guard, the Nebraska National Guard, which they offered 75% tuition reimbursement. So I went to the University of Nebraska at Omaha for 3 years. I was actually making a little bit of money. From the Navy College Fund and the National Guard. I met my wife, we got married, and then she got pregnant when I was going to University of Nebraska at Omaha. Well, at that point, I had a decision to make. Life's easy when all you got to do is take care of yourself for the most part. So I made the decision to go into the workforce at that point and not finish college. That's when I got the opportunity to go to Kellogg's, and the starting wage at Kellogg's was probably better than anything I could find with a communications degree and a minor in political science. So I went into the workforce at that point, and Kellogg's, it used to be a job, and it still hopefully will be when this is over. It used to be a job. Well, and Fiona touched on this in her book, this used to be a career. I would get on there, and that's where I'm just going to be the rest of my life. I'm going to be set up. I'll retire and live happily ever after. Kellogg's afforded me to be a homeowner, my wife to stay at home with my kids.
And one second, workers believed that for years, right? That was their understanding. I understand people always felt that way about AT&T and IBM, right? That there was essentially lifetime employment, and that it was satisfying lifetime employment.
Yeah, absolutely. When I got hired on in 2004, there was 6 job openings and there were 600 people apply. So it was a very sought after job. I got that job, and I just kind of knew that's where I'm going to be the rest of my life. And the insurance benefits and the pay was on point with what I was looking for.
So what changed that puts you on strike?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the thing that's changing, and that's why we're out there every day.
But what specifically has changed?
The 2-tier wage system is what's going on. There's 30% of our union bodies on a lower tier, and what that does is, they hire on for about $12 an hour less. It's interesting. I got sent a paycheck from a worker at Kellogg's from 1996. And her paycheck actually had a higher hourly wage than what they're paying the lower wage now. I'm not real good at mental math, how many years ago that is, but that's a pretty crazy,
And I think it's important for the audience to hear that during the pandemic, when the people that are in your union worked essentially every day, because I guess you guys were essential workers,
Sure.
Kellogg's ended up with record profits.
Absolutely.
Right? People ate a lot of cornflakes while they were sheltering at home.
Yeah.
And so the question is, how did the employees fare, even though they took the risk of catching a disease?
Sure. We showed up to work. We were at some point about 100 employees short due to the pandemic and people retiring, not wanting to have to deal with it. And when you're short, the only way to cover an absence is with an existing employee that is showing up to work. So we have what's forced overtime. I work from 7 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon. They can come up to me anytime up to 3 o'clock and say, Dan, I need you to cover a vacancy on second shift. So we need you to stay over till 7. Then up to 7 o'clock, they could say, Dan, there's a vacancy on night shift. We need you to cover that 4 hours of that. And I need you to come in at 3 a.m.
So why wasn't there leverage here? Why isn't it? I mean, it seems to me politically, this is crazy for Kellogg's not to be in a position that they would have worked you like this with record profits. What are they saying?
Yeah, they're saying our proposals are unsustainable for their future, which is completely inaccurate. Just for the simple fact that in 1996 they were making more than the lower tier. We've had negotiators from Kellogg's tell us they're willing to spend $10 million a day to keep us out on the street. This is plain and simple. What this is about the company trying to break contract labor so they can start paying people $15 an hour, and so the people on the top can continue to make their record profits and make more money. That's simply what it's about.
Fiona, let's given what Dan just said, one of the things that your book, and this makes it very different, is that you want to save these towns, right? You're not holding yourself out as an example of what everyone else should do. You're not saying, you know what, have parents and other people support you with their union dollars and hard-earned, and let them push you in the right direction, and you'll end up at Harvard with a PhD and you'll be in the White House. That's not what you're saying. You're saying that it's a shame that we're losing these towns, right? I mean, that's what I think is among the many things that's unique about your book, is you see something that is worth saving. It's almost a moral imperative.
Yeah, look, absolutely. Not everyone is going to move, right? And not everyone can move. And not everyone's going to do what I did. When my dad said, there's nothing for you here in my hometown, where everyone was losing their job. I mean, literally hundreds of thousands of people lost their jobs all at once in the 1980s when I was growing up in the northeast of England. And I kind of probably went a little bit further than my dad thought I would go, both in terms of geography and
I'm sorry, one second. This is for Americans. this consequence of that happened here, this is what we were told was Thatcherism?
Yes, exactly. And I mean, at this particular point, you know, kind of the whole idea was to, look, you've got to also remember that a lot of British industry had been nationalized after World War II to build it up, which is the same period when all the big corporations, big manufacturing plants in the United States are getting built up, and where people get tied to them because of the, you know, the way that medical benefits and healthcare are tied to the corporations. And I have to say that an awful lot of big industries, Kellogg's and, you know, others included, look a lot like the state-owned industries in the United Kingdom. They dominate the towns and the cities and the rural areas, you know, where they're located, like in, you know, Omaha, Nebraska. And they dominate everyone's lives, because without your job, you can't move around, because your healthcare and all of your benefits, you know, you name it, are tied to that particular job. So when those industries go, the communities go around them as well. And not everyone can move, because as Dan says, you know, he has his family there. Yeah. He has his kids there. You know, you've got often, in many cases, generations of people who have lived in the same towns. In my case, my great-grandparents and some of my great-great-grandparents had moved to the region to work in the coal mines. And there was also the shipyards on the coast and the steel works and the railway works. Everybody had moved there with all of their families, and they built up their lives there. And whenever all of the industry moves, the people get stuck in place because they don't have the qualifications to go somewhere else, to some service sector or financial job somewhere else. And if you're in somewhere like Omaha, Nebraska, you know, there's not going to be jobs just the next city over, or, you know, it might be the next state over. So how are you going to move when your home is there, your school is there, everything around you in the community is there? And, you know, there's not going to be any way of selling that either. I mean, in the case of my family, they had rental property anyway. They didn't actually own houses. So where they're going to get the wherewithal to move somewhere else? So the question is, what happens to those communities? What happens to those, you know, towns? And the mutually
we had in 2008 in DeWitt, Nebraska. I'm sure everybody's heard of the name Vice Grip. That was a town of 570 people. And they closed that plant and moved it to China in an effort to stay competitive, right? So that entire town is gone now. You know, where they went, I don't know. But
so Fiona, you talk in the book about, you use the word, and you would know a lot about this because you're a historian. You said you use the words Marshall Plan. You invoke the Marshall Plan. And that maybe that we need to sort of create a Marshall Plan, not to save Europe, but to save, you know, the Rust Belt and other towns. Would it work? You know, you can understand how the Marshall Plan saved, you know, Europe and Germany, but could you replace the economic engines that these corporations used to be in the United States or in England? You know, we've described people in place, and we need to somehow give them the American dream that Dan is talking about, that has been forfeited. Would a Marshall Plan work? Because I'm going to ask you later about, you know, what political agenda needs to happen. Who's coming closest to offering the Marshall Plan that would work for you and would work for Dan? So tell us a little about what it would look like.
Yeah, well, what you've just said was how it worked for, you know, me or others, and also for Dan, because the original Marshall Plan was conceived by the United States to help Europe reconstruct because of the real risks of political extremism. I mean, you literally had all of the, you know, these European cities in rubble, all of the industry had been destroyed. You had millions of refugees, people who were displaced within their own countries, not just across borders. And there was a real risk at that point of communism and, you know, kind of the radical and extreme left, you know, taking over in many countries. They're really worried about this extremism. But the Marshall Plan, just as a concept, yes, it was a massive transfer of funds, but each country developed their own program. And in the United States, we actually spend billions of dollars on all kinds of programs, but they're not given any coherence in the idea of development. I have a colleague at the Brookings Institution, Tony Pipper, who's looked for rural America, for example, which is where a lot of Nebraska would fall into. And there are literally billions of dollars in development programs that already exist in the US that could be targeted towards rural areas, in fact are, but they're just all over the place. There's no coherence to them because we haven't got that sense of redevelopment for a particular purpose. And it's certainly true that, some places are going to shrink, just as, Dan's talking about DeWitt, Nebraska. Sometimes, the towns are not going to get revitalized. But if you're in somewhere like Omaha, that is a center and that has a lot of, potential still, there's a lot of people who are, kind of dedicated to making things work. You can think about how you could build up on existing local assets, and perhaps, some kind of infusion of additional funding could help to revitalize. Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, for example, has set up an equivalent of a development corporation. And it's not the same Bethlehem, Pennsylvania as it was when it was Bethlehem Steel, but they've actually developed, quite a lot of new forward-looking, innovative ideas and businesses, and brought in new jobs, around, what is existing still in Bethlehem, even, repurposing the old steelworks, which is now a casino and a tourism center. So there is a lot of potential to kind of rethink places and for the regions and the localities themselves to develop their own programs. You can't do this from the top.
Right.
And even the Marshall Plan wasn't from the top. So it's how would Dan,
good analogy,
and his colleagues, not just at Kellogg's, but more broadly in Omaha, figure out how they could revitalize their own community, do something for themselves.
Dan, the Bureau of Labor Statistics says that there's been 8 work stoppages of corporations that have 1,000 employees or more. But I've also done some reading. I mean, and of course, I would say the Kellogg strike is the most well-known of the strikes. We've just come through a pandemic. Americans think that there's people resigning from their work and that there's a supply shortage, that the labor market, there's a great amount of consumer demand, but people don't want the jobs that are being offered. But I've also read that there's been work stoppages all over the country in much smaller industries, right? That 8 is not the number, that there are maybe, hundreds around the country.
About 160.
160, and this is strikes, rallies, protests, variations of. So help us understand this. This is all based on wages. This is because there are many Americans that are hearing something else, that people don't want to take the jobs. And you're saying, are you kidding? What is it? There's Amazon in Alabama. There's a coal mine in Alabama. There's a healthcare workers in Pittsburgh. I mean, I've heard about all of this. So give us some understanding of what's happening nationally.
Yeah, I think, I've heard the term the Great Resignation. 4 million workers left their jobs in July, and another 500,000 by August. That was a direct result of COVID. We talked about essential workers and how we worked through COVID. Meanwhile, our companies are making record profits. So when it comes time for our contract and the company still wants to take away, I think the American people are and the American worker is getting fed up with that. I understand the Republican side of it. Big business creates jobs, and I'm all for CEOs making their money and what they're owed. But when is enough enough? Steve Cahillane, our CEO, went from 9.7 million to 11.7 million from 2020 to 2021 during the time of record profits. So to take from its employers is, that doesn't resonate with people,
right?
Especially during this time of economic growth. Not everybody's in an economic growth, but certainly food industry is due to COVID. So
you happen to have been in one industry that was clearly thriving.
Sure.
Fiona, one of the things you talk about in the book throughout is the danger of populism, and how populism becomes the sort of the political movement becomes compelling precisely when there is such sense of disaffection, destabilized, lack of social mobility. But one of the things that you say in there is that populism is not necessarily about ideology. It's about the manipulation of social issues, right? Like immigration, right? Classic example of what we've seen, or abortion, or race, right? Can you talk a little more about that? Because that's not how people always think of it in ideological terms. And you're saying, no, it's really about something that's much more fundamental to the bread and butter issues of a family at home.
It is. And the thing is, and populism, just the literal definition of it's, the kind of a particular leader who makes a direct connection with people. the people.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's no representation, there's no mediation in between it. And in every setting, historical and international, you basically see somebody who comes up and says they're going to speak on behalf of the people. And it can be channeling some of their socioeconomic grievances. I mean, many of the things that we're talking about here, but it can be also cultural grievances. Because look, I mean, I'm sure Dan, you know, would agree with this. You know, a lot of your own identity is tied up with work. I mean, when my dad, because everything happens around the workplace, and you build your whole family around that. I mean, I thought that, you know, what Dan said, you know, about kind of joining the Navy, you know, kind of then getting the education, hoping to get the education, you know, through, you know, your military service. I mean, the United States military has been a wonderful source of education for people in training. But, you know, when you have your family, you know, you need to get that job. And then the workplace starts to kind of shape your whole life. My dad was a coal miner. He was a coal miner from age 14. He went down the mines, and he was always a coal miner, even when the job in the coal mine had gone. And my dad always wanted to work. I mean, there's this idea somehow that the working class don't want to work. I mean, that's BS, basically. Mm-hmm. Everybody I knew wanted to work and have a job. Nobody that I grew up with in the north of England wanted to be on, you know, what was called the dole, you know, basically on benefits, on, you know, welfare. And my dad always made just 50 pence, you know, sort of 50 cents a week more than he would have made on welfare on the dole in his job.
Which is, you're saying, is a demonstration.
It's a demonstration of that, because he thought, I mean, his whole thing was about working, providing for his family, like Dan's saying. And he was, and they were also always saying, come on, you know, pay us a little bit more here. My dad was on the lowest economic ladder in, you know, the UK on the, you know, the public sector jobs and National Health Service, cleaners, you know, kind of cooks and porters in the hospital, which is where he got his job eventually. Because, you know, he was also, he couldn't move to find another job. He hadn't got the qualifications. We didn't have a car, you know, we didn't have a telephone. You know, my dad just had to take whatever job was there locally. And it was always that question, they just need a little bit more money to be able to kind of get ahead. I mean, basically an increase in, you know, the minimum wage, or at that point, you know, whatever the wage that, you know, my dad was making, you know, getting, you know, like another extra £1 a week would have made a huge difference in paying our utility bills, you know, just having that little bit of a better quality of life. And this is where people get frustrated, right? And you feel devalued. My dad often felt devalued. It's like, you know, am I not as good a person as other people? Because nobody wants to pay us a little bit more. And that's what people feed into. You know, that's kind of when a populist leader can come along and say, I hear this, I'm listening, I see this, I'm going to fix it for you. Forget all these other people, these political parties, these other representatives, your unions, forget about your unions. You just need me to come and fix it for you. And that's what I'm going to do.
Or like, only I can do it.
Only I can do it. And you've got all these elites, you know, it's always somebody else's to blame. And maybe a union's not doing it. It's these, you know, kind of elites somewhere else who've taken your job, like, you know, the people who let your job in DeWitt go to China, for example.
But here's an area where your book really merges two areas that you know a lot about. Because in the book, I think you say something like a polarized America is a national security threat. I just love that. I think that is an incredibly original thought, right? To say, forget for a moment, forget Iran's nuclear ambitions, forget China's economic might. Here's something that makes us unbelievably vulnerable when we are a country that is polarized. It's a national security threat. And I know that because I served on the National Security Council. Maybe talk a little about that.
Yeah, because look, we can, just as somebody domestically can exploit those grievances, so can, you know, actors from the outside. And we saw that in 2016 when, you know, we had Russians pretending to be Americans on the internet, on Facebook and all these other social media platforms, sowing discord. And, you know, back in the day, in the 1970s and 1980s in the UK, for example, the KGB, the Russian security service, used to try to play with union discontent.
Huh.
You know, I mean, they couldn't do it through Facebook because it didn't exist, but they would certainly try to stir it up through the international, you know, kind of labor movement. Did it ever have
the kind of impact like 2016 where
you
could use the word meddling?
It did have political impact, you know, back in the day, because it was also then, you know, could be kind of used to suggest that the labor movement was somehow linked to the Communist Party.
Yes,
and then, you know, there were all this other, you know, problems. But also we're not competitive anymore. Well, people like Dan and his colleagues feel that they've been kind of left out here. The United States is not competitive because we're not seeing this as a kind of an investment in ourselves. I mean, the fact that people like Dan and all of his colleagues feel left out, disregarded, disrespected, and that their identity as workers is being disregarded, and that there are, you know, basically people profiting from them, that can all be exploited. And, why is, Dan's and his colleagues, demands and, desires to be, have opportunity, something to be disregarded here, because opportunity is the driving force of America. It always has been.
And the point that you made about your father, I love the line where you said the feeling of being devalued, right? Like, what does that do to a human being, right? That sense of being devalued. And I was thinking about it. We don't talk about this, but there was a book I read in graduate school, Tally's Corner, that tried to understand the question from the point of view of African-American men, saying that, like, this is the effect of unemployment in the African-American family, right? That if you're unemployed in a nation that defines you by what you do, and if you're not doing something, then you're nothing, right?
Yeah,
and that is a horrible thing to think about. Like, I
People
used to
always
say
ask
to
you,
my,
right? Yeah,
I
who
used to
you
say to
are.
my students all the time, I said, America, you go to a party, the first thing they said, oh, so what do you do?
Exactly.
Right? Which to me seems like an insulting question, because most people aren't that happy at work anyway. Right? But the fact that we meet each other with what do you do, and if you aren't doing anything, that is a horrible answer at a party, and it's a horrible answer what it would do to the man of the house, right? What
And
would
it's a horrible answer, right, Dan? I mean, if somebody's asking that in Omaha, right now, well, what do you do? And then,
Yeah,
you've
well,
already said that.
I can tell you, I've worked over 3,000 hours for a year for the last 18 years, because first and foremost, I'm a husband and a father, and I've always felt that it's my job to provide for my family. So I've done so. I've missed first steps, first words, birthday parties, games, you name it, and I've made that sacrifice over the years to provide for my family so they can have everything that they want, plus extras. You talked about making 50 cents more just to have a little bit extra, and that's what I've done, and that's what everybody at Kellogg's has done over the years for our families. So yeah, it comes time for contract, and they want to take and let me state that we're not asking, we don't have demands. We're not asking for a lot of extras. We're basically just trying to keep from things getting taken from us at this point.
Right.
Yeah.
So talk about feeling devalued. That's absolutely the way I feel.
So I also think I'm interested in this in generationally. I grew up much older. I think I'm older than both of you by miles. But I will say that I remember a time when the American labor movement, the AFL-CIO, that these things, Jimmy Hoffa, I'm from the generation that thought that there was real power in the labor movement. And I wonder whether you, as a president of a local chapter, do you worry about the strength, the influence, the future of the American labor movement? Because I would say to you, the fact that until we set up this night, largely because we wanted to introduce our audience to Fiona, and then we thought, who could we pair her with to make it interesting? But we thought, I only knew of the Kellogg strike. I didn't know that there were 140 of these things all over. So I'm wondering whether, from your perspective, now that you've become a union man, a political person in the labor movement, do you worry about the labor movement?
No, I'm actually excited for the labor movement. Quite the opposite. Since our strike, there's been so many unions reaching out to us and supporting us, whether that's monetarily or coming out and standing on the picket line with us, showing their support in ways, and unions I didn't even know existed in the country, all coming forward to help in this movement. And we've started to receive phone calls from other, different workers around Omaha wanting to ask how they can organize.
Huh.
So I have a feeling when this is all said and done, unions are going to be stronger.
Huh. Good news.
I think I would just like to jump in on this, Dan, because look, this is how unions started off, right? It was grassroots movements by people like yourself.
Yeah.
So when my great-grandfather, who was one of the spokesmen for the Durham Miners Association, got started, they were trying to stop kids like him who'd gone down the miles at 12 or 13, to kind of get, kind of a different age. My dad went down at 14. They were trying to kind of basically stop little kids from being sent down the mines, because in the kind of period when he was starting off, they were trying to get safety equipment. I mean, this was life and death stuff. And it wasn't just about wages. And then it became about education and giving the communities more assistance. people think that, somehow unions are destructive. They were constructive. They were entities that were built up by the workers themselves from the bottom up as mutual support. And they stopped people from ending up dependent on the state because people helped each other. And they help get people qualifications and new perspectives. I mean,
it's
it's
definitely a community.
Revitalizing it.
Yeah. Fiona, I want to pick up on something that Dan said a moment ago. You worked in 3 presidential administrations, both Republican and Democrat. So you're really a good person to ask this question to. I find it baffling, the politics of our era. Because Dan said a moment ago, hey, look, I understand Republican Wall Street people who think that a CEO should make a lot of money. But it seems like the 2020 election, the partisan priorities seem to flip. And I wonder whether it's because of the populism that you speak about. Like, for instance, it seemed as if red state America, Rust Belt America, were Republicans. If you ask most people on the left today, right, who are the Republicans, they're not going to say Wall Street bankers. They don't even think of what Dan said a moment ago. I don't even think they don't know what he's talking about. What Wall Street banker? They think a Wall Street banker who went to an Ivy League school is going to vote for Biden. That's the candidate for him. The better educated Wall Street, Northeastern blue state elite. So I wonder whether did it flip, or am I just confused? And if it did flip, did it flip because of what Trump managed to do as a populist authoritarian, which is what you talk about in the book?
Well, there's parts of that, but there's also this flip. You keep talking about education. And, Dan was also talking about that too. The difficulty, right, of getting your education and getting into debt and not being able to get a job at the end of it all and having to provide for your family. Education's become this crazy dividing line in the United States now. When I say crazy, it is crazy, because education should be an investment of all of us in our broader society, in all of our children and all of in ourselves. And it used to be, and I talked about my father-in-law, James Keene in 1950, benefiting from, up until then, the GI Bill and the expansion of education after World War II. He didn't pay for his education either. And he was able to go from the farm and commute from the farm and keep working the farm and get an education at Wesleyan University in South Dakota and then get a job without having debt. My husband's the same age as me, in our 50s. He got Pell Grants for, first, generation of people going off to college. And all of those grants, those opportunities, apart from through the military, that Dan was talking about, have dried up. And unions used to help with education. My husband's, and corporations did too. When his dad went from General Mills to International Corn Products, I think it was, I can't remember if they still exist now, they got matching grants for college for their kids. All of those mechanisms have dried up. And that's kind of where populism comes in, because Trump, who went to college, by the way, starts saying, I'm talking for the working classes, all of these people who are elites. In the day my dad wanted me to go on to college and get an education and get degrees and, do better. That was the aspiration of people in the working class, in, the kind of the blue collar class. People wanted their kids to get an education because they thought it was valuable to them. Now people are being told, oh, no, you shouldn't have an education. That's just for these elites. Yeah. Education is a right for everybody. So it is a privilege, but it's a right. It's a driver of mobility. Right. But if people feel like an education is going to hold them back, or that it's going to create huge debt, I mean, who wants to take on? I wouldn't have had an education. I've had to take on $60,000, $100,000, $200,000 of debt. I'm with Dan. Wow. I'd have gone out and got a job. And so we have to open that up. And I think, grassroots labor, unions, that Dan is talking about, it can't be political parties. We've got to do things for ourselves. Mm-hmm. We're getting too dominated by these two political parties, the idea that we're either red and blue America, as opposed to what Dan has behind him, red, white and blue America, where we're all Americans. And we should all be helping each other out to have that mobility. I mean, it's insane that Dan and his colleagues are having to stand there on picket lines all the time, basically agitating for things that ought to be, kind of common sense for all of us.
Hey, Dan, tell us a little about what life is like on a picket line.
The first week was kind of the honeymoon phase. It was exciting. It's definitely an emotional cocktail.
Is it very cold right now in Nebraska?
No, we actually had a beautiful day today. It was in the 60s and sunny, and today we are taking a turn for the worse.
What will happen in a month if the strike doesn't end?
we're going to stand the line. You know, a lot of I've been quoted in the media. A lot of battles have been won in the dead of winter, and we feel like we're ready, and we're going to stand the line for as long as this takes to get a fair and equitable contract.
Is the honeymoon period still extended? Do people still feel motivated that they're in the right line and that they should hold it out?
Yeah, we absolutely feel we're in the right line, but you know, reality is setting in for a lot of us. We haven't had a paycheck in 36 days. Kellogg's has cut off our medical benefits. We've had a suicide, and Kellogg's is not paying out his death benefits for his family. Yeah, it's tough to talk about.
And Dan, while you compose yourself, as I understand, I'm watching you. I would also say that you now must feel a different sense of responsibility. You're no longer just an employee at Kellogg's. You're the president of the union.
Well, sure, and it's not just about the 480 people that I represent or the 1,400 at Kellogg's around the country. I mean, this is about the American worker now. This isn't just America anymore. I've gotten phone calls from Canada. Right. There's a main newspaper in Japan that's coming down to our lines on the 19th. They want to know what we're all about. Wow. South America, I've gotten calls from India. So this is global, because this isn't just an American issue. This is growing, and it's growing very quickly because we as individuals feel like we deserve to get, you know, fair pay and benefits, you know, when people are making money off our backs.
Yeah.
Fiona, I have to ask this question because there are people who say it all the time. You worked in the Trump administration. How do you respond to people who say, well, before the pandemic, there was historically low unemployment and historically low poverty rates especially among African Americans as Hispanic. He's in your book, you know, you worked for the man, you knew the man, you testified at his impeachment trial. You had an incredible window into, I think, what did you call it? It was a domestic errand. I think that was the term of art you used. I love that. I remember when you said it. It was such a clever way of describing, as if to say, hey, look, you know, I'm supposed to be responsible for national security and foreign policy. I'm not an errand person, or neither should the ambassador. So Donald Trump doesn't come from Dan's world or your world. He didn't have any of these financial issues. He did say, I will fix things for you. So what do you say to people that say, and he did fix it? We had low unemployment. Did he just luck out?
Well, look at the kind of jobs that were created. They're not the kind of jobs that Dan is talking about here, right? Because they were jobs without benefits and protections.
I see.
And also, I just have to say, just as a comment I've been living in the United States for 30 years now. But, you know, in the United Kingdom, we had a National Health Service. This isn't socialism. It isn't Marxism. It isn't some crazy, you know, kind of death squads trying to figure out whether you get your medical care or you don't. It was set up after World War II, when the country had been brought to its knees and people were just absolutely desperate. And it was set up standalone from your work because they knew that there would always be cases where people wouldn't be in work. And so the National Health Service was set up just to give a basic level of care so that people could move from job to job. So you weren't going to be tied to one position. And notice that Dan has said here, they've had their benefits cut off. If the United States was a bit more sensible and not ideological and crazy about talking about healthcare, Dan and his colleagues would still be able to go to the doctor while they're kind of striking for better pay. With the fact that we've tied our medical care to work, it's like what happened in the Soviet Union. Hello, you know, people say this is all ideological. In the Soviet Union, people's healthcare was also tied to their workplace. They had work clinics and everything too. So when their enterprises closed down, you know, they also lost their healthcare. It existed in theory, but they actually lost it in practice.
And you said it would also increase the potential for mobility.
It would.
Right?
I mean, Dan and others wouldn't be held hostage by the companies they work for. Essentially, our enterprises in the United States, our big manufacturing companies, become like the company towns that, you know, my family worked for, and the big corporations before the National Health Service or before the nationalized industry, the old robber barons. They become stuck. They're not empowered. and they're not, kind of given mobility. So they're in a bind. And that makes the situation for Dan and his colleagues even worse. And so we have to start thinking about, all of these issues here in a very sensible way, take the ideology out of them. And we have to kind of like figure out then, kind of when lots of jobs are created. Yes, I mean, Dan could now go off and drive an Uber or Lyft, right? Kind of, and sort of self-employed.
And you're saying those numbers were counted. You're saying those numbers got counted in the.
Exactly, yes, they did. And it is true. People were self-employed and they were kind of, employed in lots of different jobs. I mean, I know loads of people who had 4 or 5 different jobs, but they never had healthcare, they didn't have protections, and they didn't have benefits.
I see.
And that's what Dan and all of his, colleagues who are striking are asking for. They want to basically have that wherewithal, and I think Dan should be able to speak for himself here, to be able to have a meaningful life.
Dan, you got
on the table and have healthcare, and to know that their kids are going to get a good schooling, and that, they're going to be able to basically just afford to keep things together.
Dan, I'd like you to answer a little of that, but before that, I want to add to that for you. Well, first of all, answer that part first, because that's an important part. Answer what Fiona just asked you.
Okay, well, I wonder, as far as CEOs go, if not 50, 60 years ago, you talked about being able to move job to job, be self-sufficient. 50, 60 years ago, CEOs all moved up from the mailroom. So they were always, they were not necessarily every time, but that was definitely the case.
And wasn't there a number, I'm sorry, but wasn't there a number that historically the lowest paid person was never paid more than 20 times less than the CEO, and today it's like 100 times? Kellogg's CEO is 246 times its median and average worker. So we're saying historically, the CEOs of major corporations, if you were the janitor, if that was the lowest position, the CEO only made 20 times what he or she made. Yeah. So I wonder if that's where a lot of this is being driven from, is a disconnect between, regular guy, myself, and somebody who goes to an Ivy League school, who's being born almost like a caste type society that you speak about in your book. But I think that's a lot of where this disconnect is coming from. It takes a lot of the human emotion out, I think, on their end. And I said it again. I'll say it again. When is enough for the people on top? 12 million is not enough. I mean, what's the magic number? What's he looking for? Is it 20 million? When do they stop taking from their workers? I don't know if I answered the question. Yeah, no, you did. Is there, even this is a question, I guess, for both of you. Is there anything, because I know, Fiona, you were not giving a public service announcement for Bernie Sanders a moment ago. That wasn't your intention, right?
No, it's just basically on a level.
No, you were just saying
experience. I mean, I'm Dan, but added on to that with my Harvard degree. And my dad said, go out and educate yourself, and don't forget where you came from, and try to advocate on our behalf. Well, I went off in a national security foreign policy direction, but I'm coming back now because I'm seeing the disastrous state the United States is in our politics because of this kind of problems that Dan is living right now as we're all talking about it.
But what I meant about public service announcement, when you reminded us that there's universal health care in England and in Canada
and in a whole bunch of capitalist countries where people make millions in their salaries as CEOs.
This is Bernie Sanders' talking point, right? This is what he says. This is why I said this is what he's been saying. What makes us so unique that we don't offer this when other countries do? And you're describing a situation where it's a shackling device. It makes it by tying them together. Are there political leaders for both of you out there that are saying the things that you think, for instance, that they're saying the things that if they were in charge would probably call Fiona Hill and say, help me construct the Marshall Plan? Right? Are there people out there, Fiona, that you can think of? They don't have to be, we may not know who they are. A local congressman from Maryland, I don't know, that actually understands what you're saying, is focused on this. Dan, I don't know, nowadays, we don't think of Democratic officials as particularly pro-labor. Like in my era, that was obvious, right? That a person's platform always said pro-labor. I don't think Democratic candidates actually use that term of art
Well,
anymore.
can I answer that?
Yeah, tell us.
So we've had 17 senators draft a letter to the CEO of Kellogg's.
Both Nebraska senators, by the way?
Yeah, 17 Nebraska senators. Mike McConnell drafted it and sent it. I think Kellogg's knew that the left was going to put pressure on them. But I've been working diligently with both sides, and I can't say his name, but there's going to be a high-level Republican come to our picket line tomorrow. So I think this is really becoming a bipartisan issue, and for good reason, because these are just Americans, like we talked about earlier, just trying to get by with their lives, that want good wages, and this shouldn't be a Republican versus Democrat issue, because this is just all American people. So I think I'm starting to see, just locally anyway, within Nebraska, I'm starting to see a shift where Republicans aren't afraid to come out and say they're labor friendly, because they shouldn't have to be ashamed to say anything like that. People get it.
Fiona, people watch FOLCS. This is our programs are really smart. So the right people are watching this. Someone's going to call you up and say, please be my now national domestic advisor. Forget national security advisor. This book, There Is Nothing for You Here, qualifies you now to be a policymaker on the domestic side. And so I think it's an important point I want to make here about you and your future. Is there anyone now that you think could make the call that you'd say, you know what, I'll sign up and work with you?
Look, I'm really kind of myself. One of the reasons I wrote the book was to sort of challenge myself to get more engaged in these kinds of things, because I have that personal experience, and I do remember, my dad saying, "Don't," when he did say, "There's nothing for you, move on. Don't forget where you came from and who you are." Yeah. Because I mean, the problem, for Dan and many of his colleagues is people, kind of, it's hard for them to have their voice and to get it heard. And when you kind of have to play with Dan's trying to do this with bipartisan politics, it often takes on this partisan tone. Mm-hmm. I mean, really, we need to have our communities all mobilizing, around to help each other out here. And I mean, places like, Nebraska, knowing that from my own family, there's very strong community spirits. These are relatively small, towns and sort of cities. People are all their neighbors. And the fact that we've been ripping ourselves apart on this partisan basis is an absolute disaster, because as Dan's saying, again, we're all Americans here. And we need to recapture that kind of can-do spirit that, Americans can all get ahead and invest in ourselves and each other and stop playing these games here. I mean, so figure out how we can all help Dan and his colleagues, work this out. Before
we come to an end, we're almost done. I want to leave Fiona one question, because the book is also a cautionary tale, because you remind us that if we continue on a certain road, we are in the pathway of what Russia was in the 1990s, and what you now have is essentially a president for life, Putin, in Russia. And you mentioned Hungary, and you mentioned China and Venezuela. That what you're noticing, and look, that you do this stuff for a living, Fiona. You chart the globe. You look at these trends. You know what you're seeing. When you look at something, you know what you're looking at. So just remind the audience what you mean by this cautionary tale, because the United States could end up like those 4 countries.
Yeah, look, Dan said, the people at the kind of the top have forgotten, or maybe they never even knew what it's like to be an ordinary person. I think, there's actually an awful lot of people who've kind of risen up, kind of through politics, but their voices aren't really heard. And because it's very easy for someone at the top to exploit all of this grievance, because the system isn't delivering. I have to say that I do think that President Biden understands it, but I'm not sure that all of the party around him, he's trying to and has tried to work in a bipartisan fashion. But, our politics has now been structured in win, lose, victory, defeat for one side over another. There are no sides, right now. There's just America, and there's Dan and his, colleagues in Nebraska who, want to participate in, kind of what everybody else is. And particularly after this pandemic, this is an opportunity to rebuild. And to kind of move forward in a different fashion, just like the UK did after World War II, when it built up a lot of these institutions that tried to benefit a larger society. Welfare meant well-being. It didn't mean a handout from the government. It meant a hand up, restructuring, rebuilding, which is basically what Dan's asking for. He's asking for a hand up, not a handout, a hand up. And when people don't get that, And this is what we saw in Russia. The system didn't deliver in the 1990s. There was just massive, dislocation, millions of people losing their jobs, losing their workplaces, losing their sense of identity. And then a guy came along and said he was going to fix it. He wasn't going to mess about with political parties, because the political parties were all fighting among each other as well, like we're seeing now. And eventually he does enough, to kind of change things for people, creating, in a way that, Trump did lots of jobs and things, stabilizing the economy, but really taking away all the freedoms until the point that, people then suddenly look around and go, oh, hang on, things really changed here. And you see that, in China, in return for freedom, people get jobs. In Venezuela, it's a total mess, but, it's kind of, basically the people writ large, real people, not just the people as some abstract concept, their voices are just not getting heard. They're not getting that empathy. They're not seeing themselves getting reflected at the top. We need to do better. And I think that state and local government, the fact that Dan's getting people to come and join him on the picket line, the fact that, you had Dan on, and I'm really glad you did this.
Thank you.
Bringing Dan on tonight so that people can actually see Dan, a real person, who's having a really hard time right now and can understand that. Not just, somebody's written a book about it, but, I know it because, I went to university in the UK in 1984 against the backdrop of the miners' strike, the largest industrial action in the UK since the 1926 general strike, which my grandfather took part in, by the way, as well. When people were just devastated. And the miners' strike ended up with the end of the mining and coal mining in the United Kingdom. In a 10-year period, coal mining had just disappeared completely because the miners' strike didn't achieve anything. It was just a big battle between the miners and Margaret Thatcher. It doesn't have to be like that.
Right.
It can actually be, Dan is asking for something that all Americans want, not just the workers at Kellogg's.
A great way to end the night. Let me just announce an event for next week, and then we'll say goodnight to you both. Let's see, there we go. We got something coming up here, Madeline? I think there we go. November 15th, next week, one of our producing partners, IFC Films, has a new documentary that's coming out. It's called Kurt Vonnegut, Unstuck in Time. Of course, everyone knows, or should know, the American novelist Kurt Vonnegut, Breakfast of Champions, Slaughterhouse-Five, Cat's Cradle. And the director is Robert Wide. I think that's how his name is pronounced. He's going to be joining us. And some of you will have an opportunity to watch this film as a private screening if you sign up early enough. And Robert Wide, I understand, is the director for the HBO series Curb Your Enthusiasm. So he could actually be an interesting guest. And let's see, don't forget, visit us on folks.org. Make sure you sign up for our email addresses. Also, of course, we're a nonprofit. I think you can see down there below me to my left, or is it my right? You'll see the donate button that you can donate to folks.org. Dan, we're going to be, all of us are rooting for you. And we'll be watching out for you. You've given us a face for the labor movement now, especially in Nebraska, in connection with this Nebraska's work stoppage. We're concerned about the winter, and we're going to send off warm feelings towards you and hope that this thing ends in time. I understand, I read somewhere that this experience for you has led you to think that you want to get involved in the national labor movement. So I have a feeling you have a future here as a laborer, and you can see Fiona definitely nodding, and she knows this, so she's spotting talent. So we'll keep looking after you, Dan. See where you go.
I'll leave you with our motto: one day longer, one day stronger.
Oh, I love that. It's great. Everyone, this book is essential reading. This is a Christmas gift, a Hanukkah gift, Thanksgiving gift. It's worth reading. It's fun. It's well written. It's engaging. It offers, and it also gives you a window. I didn't really think much about it, but it gives you a window into the Trump administration. You actually, the courageous woman that testified at the hearing is writ large. She comes, she's unplugged here. And you get to hear her in a very different way, in a very compelling way. So if you're interested in the 4 years of the Trump administration, it resulted in the Ukrainian infamous phone call. That's another reason to own this book. Fiona, you're just so charming and so awesome. And so we're so happy that you we were Folks guest. You allowed us to sort of have you tell us something that I think, unfortunately, not many of us gave much thought to. about forgotten people and forgotten towns and how to rescue them. Good night to both of you. Good night to our audience. I'm Thane Rosenbaum for FOLCS.
Hey, Dan.
Yes.
Good luck with everything. I'll be thinking about you.
Thank you very much for that.
Yeah.
And it was a pleasure to meet you. And I know my daughters were excited for this because
Yeah, well, we'll give them my best, and I'm very easy to track down. So, you know, kind of, you can look me up on the internet and find me quite easily, and I'd love to hear from you.
Okay.
And I'll tell my family, the extended Keene family out in Nebraska, to look out for you.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I got to go to Minden and check out that.
You've got to, yeah.
Yeah.
Once you've got your other issues resolved.
Once I'm back to work.
Yeah. Take good care. All the best,
You
Dan.
too. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye.